because this is a subject that is more difficult, or what would we say, more dry, there might be fewer people than if it were, the 8 verses of training the mind, or Lanrim, or something more, maybe not so terrifying. One of my great teachers, Geshe Zopa, Lundrup Zopa, who passed away a few years ago, Geshe Zopa, when he would be teaching these kind of philosophical subjects, and of course, ones that were more complex, like the Majjhimaka Vatara, and the Drangne Legshe Ningpo, the text on the definitive and interpretive meaning of the sutras, he would say, now we're going to be chewing dry bones. So, not like soft tofu or sampa or something like that, but like dry bones. So you have to have a certain kind of courage and resilience. And I just want to encourage you about that. The subject of tenets, the philosophical schools that were recognized by the great Indian scholars and by the Tibetan scholars. This subject is usually one of the first that's taught to the monks, so that they can get an overview of the various things that they're going to be studying. They study each of the schools in turn, not necessarily. In fact, they usually study the Vaibhashika in detail, the very first school that will be the lowest of the Hinayana schools. They usually study that last in detail when they're already geshes. And it's considered to be, let's say, Geshe Tekchok, who was one of my teachers also, who taught us, he began teaching what we were going to call the master's program at Manjushri Institute in the late 70s. Geshe said when we began Tenets, he said that you shouldn't be discouraged about the material, thinking, oh, this is, what good is this? I want to meditate. I want to meditate on Tantra or Mahamudra, or develop bodhicitta, or develop samadhi, or, all sorts of apparently practical things. But Geshe said that listening to and studying one course of tenets, usually the Tibetan Lamas said that was more meritorious than doing a Vajrasattva retreat. You might do a Vajrasattva retreat for 3 months, or 6 months, or something like that. So there are great benefits in studying this material. So with that as an encouragement, let's begin for a couple of minutes in doing some meditation. Then we're going to do a praise to Manjushri. Then I think the center is going to do some ritual offering of mandala, and then we will begin the discourse. So this meditation at the beginning of each session is to calm your mind. And within that calmness, we'll be meditating on the nature of the mind as time goes on. Within that calmness, to try to develop a special Mahayana motivation for participating in the class. So let's sit comfortably, relax your body, and what is more difficult, relax your mind. I like to think in my own case, any other thoughts that are going through my mind, worries, conceptions, they can be dealt with later. And then focus your attention on the breathing, on your respiration, without controlling it, just as though turning your attention from other things, just watching in the background the breathing, recognizing when you're inhaling, when it's changing direction, and when you're exhaling, and mentally note that. This is the first inhalation. Now it's changing direction. This is the first exhalation. And you can leave off the numbers at the beginning here, counting them, but we will eventually count them also. Here, an important point to note is that you don't simply continue thinking the things that you were thinking before and sort of pay attention to the breathing with the part of your mind, or sort of like out of the side of your eye or something, but to take that as your principal and sole object of observation, letting go of other thoughts. Now turn your attention away from the breathing and just observe your mental consciousness. What is that? The entity, that thing that is thinking, planning, observing. You can scan your other senses, remind yourself it's not the eye consciousness I'm going to be paying attention to, not the ear consciousness. Whatever is happening, whatever sounds are happening around you, you can ignore them. It's not the olfactory, the smell consciousness, nose consciousness, not the tongue consciousness, not the body consciousness. that is aware of the pains in your body, and so forth. Let those drift into the background and just watch with part of your mind, watch the rest of your mental consciousness. Because the consciousness is formless, doesn't have a shape or color, obviously it's difficult to locate, to observe. So we first begin to observe it by noticing the cloud-like thoughts that are passing through your mind. Don't follow them. Just notice if there's some inner conversation going on and let it go. Thoughts of the past, memories, thoughts of the future, what you will be doing, maybe plans. Observations about the present. Notice whether there is some continuum of affliction in your mind, maybe a sense of anger or resentment. This is taking too long, or some other thought, or attachment, longing. Let them all go, seeing them as thoughts, appearances to the spaciousness of your mind within which they are arising. They remain a while, and if not paid attention to, they'll disappear. The appearance of this space-like or clear light nature of the mind doesn't arise automatically. It's something that you get to with your wisdom through observing that the mind doesn't obstruct thoughts. It's like space in that way. It's not obstructed by thoughts. It's clear and cognizing, knowing. And very relaxing. This is what we call the conventional clear light nature of the mind. It's a resource that you always have, even when things are chaotic and worries and emotions arise. Just recalling this, going back to this clear light nature of the mind, you can let go of those disturbing thoughts. See things in perspective. recall that because of the fact that we have a life of leisure and endowment right now, we're born as a human, where the Dharma is flourishing still, has not disappeared. We have the various outer circumstances of benefactors and friends that help us practice, teachers that lead us. Because of these conditions, we have the opportunity of meditating on this nature of the mind and developing good qualities, as well as overcoming our negative habits, afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, closed-mindedness. Rejoicing in that good fortune, recognize that we could spend this life simply accumulating wealth, which is apparently a big object of interest of many people in the world. Some people sort of equate it and power, the acquisition of power, popularity, and so forth with the American dream. Rather than that, because all of those moments of superficial happiness we experience due to pleasure of the senses or the acquisition of possessions or wealth or fame and so forth, all of those moments are lost in a moment, in an instant. Just the memory of them usually is not sufficient of what we had in the past to bring joy to the mind. But with this life of leisure and endowment, we can develop good qualities, overcome our faults, transform ourselves, and become a real, fully qualified human, someone who is compassionate, feels empathy for others, and eventually develop the bodhisattva mindset of working for enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. How wonderful that would be if all of my prejudices, my partiality toward friends and enmity toward enemies and so forth could be overcome. I could view the slate, the spaciousness of the existence of sentient beings all equally and work for their benefit rather than working for satisfying my own ego and the self-cherishing attitude. To bring about that change, to actually become a bodhisattva, we need to know the path, how to meditate. We need to depend on the great treatises and teachings that are given, and to understand those, we need to put them in perspective of the various interpretations of the path by the great practitioners and scholars of the past, Buddhist scholars and pundits, meditators. So with that in mind, think, I'm going to participate in this class on tenets in order to see all of this in perspective, to understand, to have a basis of understanding the highest philosophical views of emptiness, how to develop love and compassion, bodhicitta. So for that reason, I'm going to listen to these teachings with that thought in mind, to become a Buddha eventually, an omniscient being, totally benign, totally beneficial toward others, for the welfare of all sentient beings. Thinking that as a motivation for participating both in this whole course and in particular in today's talk. Not simply to accumulate intellectual knowledge to show off at the next cocktail party or to feel some sense of superiority, but to utilize the information to become a better person. And then bring your attention back to the present. And yeah, before we go on, anyone have any question about the meditation? You can unmute yourself, and any question or observation? Many of you have done much meditation and have done this kind of thing many times before, so there may not be, but if there's someone who has some thought, a question? Okay, so as one of the organizers is going to put up on the screen, this is an image of red-yellow manjushri, Arapatsanadi manjushri. Of course, manjushri is a meditational deity with respect to which we can develop our wisdom. So in the monasteries, especially when studying these philosophical subjects, often there would be a praise to Manjushri, and that will appear, the words of that will appear now. There we go. So let's recite this together as a praise and a request to Manjushri. The Buddha, Manjushri is the sort of the manifestation of the Buddha's wisdom. So all Buddhas, whether they be Tara or Shakyamuni, they can manifest as Manjushri in order to enhance our wisdom. So let's recite together. Homage to my Lama and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scripture symbolic of his seeing all as it is, whose pure genius shines like the sun, unclouded by the two obscurations, who with compassion, like a father for his only child, teaches with 60-fold eloquence. All beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, groping in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by suffering. You, Manjushri, whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma, who wields wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance, hewing down our every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, gone to the end of the 10 grounds, have completed the 10 grounds, the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with 112 adornments. O Manjushri, to you I bow. Dispel the darkness of my mind. So that kind of request, recite together this mantra. We'll recite 7 times, Om Arapatsanadi, and then take a deep breath after the 7th, and we'll recite the seed syllable, the final syllable D, which is sort of like the encompassing of all of the Buddha's quick wisdom. We'll recite that 108 times. You think you can? With one breath. You know, having to like that. So let's recite the mantra 7 times. Om Arapatsanadi, Om Arapatsanadi, Om Arapatsanadi, Om Arapatsanadi, Om Arapatsanadi, Om Arapatsanadi, Om Arapatsanadi. And then swallow some saliva and imagine the seed syllable D comes from your tongue down to your heart chakra. Blessing it with the conditions necessary to develop wisdom. And then I think someone wants to offer a mandala, which is the words of which are in the next.
Sashipoki Jukshing Meto Tramri Rabling Nidegan Pati Sange Jingdu Mikte Uwai Droku Nam Dagjina Jopa O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Nirya Tayami.
Thank you. Okay. So, preliminary things out of the way. It's interesting, when I was in Russia one time teaching, I visited a group. One fellow was kind of their guru. He was very, I kind of modeled himself on some self-imagined idea of how lamas sort of like were the boss and beat the students or something like that. Anyway, when they said the mandala offering, he had in phonetics, they had yidam, Om Yidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayama instead of idam. Idam, maybe you know, means this in Sanskrit. Yidam is a word for meditational deity, you know, like Manjushri or Tara or Chenrezi or something like that. They just assumed they knew what that meant. They said Yidam. Om Yidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Okay, joking aside. So we're going to be talking about the philosophical schools, as were kind of codified by the later Buddhists around the times of the flourishing of the monasteries in India, Buddhist monasteries, Nalanda, Vikramashila, and so forth, who had, the ability to look back over the past, how Buddhism had been taught from the beginning, how the various interpretations of Buddha's teachings were systematized and became kind of philosophical schools. And they divided these various, they could see essentially four main philosophical schools that had evolved over time. Two of those schools we would classify from the Mahayana point of view. We would say they were the schools of the lesser vehicle, the Hinayana, although in modern parlance, Buddhists tend not to use the word Hinayana any longer, even though the Buddha himself used that word in his Mahayana sutras, not all the time, but in the context of, say, encouraging people to develop an aspiration to become Buddha for the sake of sentient beings. The Buddha said, those of my followers who have faith and have great intelligence should not be satisfied with my Hinayana, my lesser vehicle. They should strive for the Mahayana, my great vehicle. So the sense of vehicle in Buddhism means that which gets you to your destination, right? So the Hinayana is, the Buddha referred to it that way because it's a vehicle that brings a limited number of people to a limited destination. That is, it brings the practitioner themselves and maybe their direct disciples who they teach or something like that, you might say, to the destination of the lesser vehicle nirvana, what we call passing beyond sorrow, escape from cyclic existence. No small feat. Someone who is an arhat, if we were to meet them, we would have no way of differentiating them from a Buddha in our present state. They would be, someone who, attained nirvana, became an arhat. Their minds would be totally calm, wise. They could give incredible, motivation and direction to us. They would be an Arya being, they would be someone, a superior being who's realized emptiness directly. So of the four philosophical schools, two of those schools are schools of the lower vehicle, that main occupation, preoccupation, is to achieve nirvana. Two of the four schools, on the other hand, are the Mahayana philosophical schools. And so we're going to be studying those. As I mentioned before, or maybe I hadn't mentioned this point before, that we might wonder why we would go to the effort of studying and learning and trying to understand the lower tenets first. When we talk about these tenets, there are four schools: Vaibhashika, and when we say them in Sanskrit, Vaibhashika school. In Tibetan, we say Chetamawa. The Sautrantika school. Both of these, Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, are Hinayana schools. Sautrantika in Tibetan is Dodepa. Do means sutra. And then the Chittamatra school, mind-only school, which is the first of the Mahayana schools, which is called Sem Sampa. Sem means mind, chitta, and matra, not mantra. Matra is a Tibetan, is an Indian word, Sanskrit word that means only or mere. So mere mind or mind-only school. And then the Madhyamaka school, which has a slightly different name here, although in the translations they put Madhyamaka. Excuse me. Don't worry, you can't catch my cough over the internet, I don't think. They are called in this text, usually is called the proponents of non-entityness, to distinguish them from the others. So these four schools, we would say that the highest of those views of reality, they all have slightly different interpretations of the Buddhist teachings. They have slightly different memories of what the Buddha taught that are based on scriptures. For instance, the Hinayana schools mainly depend on what is called the Pali canon. Pali is a language that was one of the dialects of India that was spoken during the time of the Buddha. And it became the tradition after the time of Ashoka, maybe 300 years after the Buddha, that all of these teachings that people had remembered from the time of the Buddha, that they'd used memorization to keep alive, they would be encoded in Pali language, in script. So those texts, mainly the Pali canon is mainly the teachings of the Hinayana, and the teachings that the Buddha gave of the Mahayana, which perhaps were written down slightly later time, usually were encoded in Sanskrit. So in this study of tenets, we're going to depend on various texts. So one of the first ones, the basic thing that probably you all have access to, or if you don't, there should be some way of you downloading the text that you can put on your tablet or even your phone, or you could print out. I printed out from the PDF. Make sure that you put the ink quality high so that it's easily readable if you're getting old like me, your eyes, and make sure that it's formatted so that it's nice and the letters are nice and big, but this, not so big that the pages, some things are missing from the page.
Venerable George,
yes.
Let me just let people know that on the page for the course, there is a materials link. And if you click on that materials link, it'll take you to a Dropbox, and they will have actually 2 different texts available, a commentary and some charts and other things. So people should just be aware that if you just click that link, you can download it to your computer as PDF files and you can print those out. So they are available.
Thank you, Bob. So when we say the translations, it is the 2 different translations of the same text. So you can, if you're someone who has to have everything, you can print out both, or you can print out one and have the other one on your tablet to see the difference, the way that different words were translated. One is by Sangye Khandro, Venerable Sangye Khandro, who may have taught, I don't know, has she taught it? Thupten Noble Ding?
She actually is going to teach. Yes, coming up soon. I think maybe, I'm not sure, somebody could correct me, but maybe next month, either in April or May, I think she's teaching.
Fantastic. So Sangye Khandro is an old friend who had taken ordination just before I came to Kopan in 1974. So she's one of the oldest, long-lasting female practitioners, Buddhist practitioners. So she translated it once when we were studying in English. The other one is more recently updated by Glenn Svensson, trying to align it with the current terminology that the FPMT likes to use for various things. They're both essentially the same. So that's one level. Another thing that you might like to get if you'd like to have more information is this book that is still available called Cutting Through Appearances. It was translated by Geshe Zopa, who I mentioned earlier, talking about the tough bones, the dry bones, along with Jeffrey Hopkins. It's the part on tenets is the second half of the book. The first part is talking about sort of a Lanrim puja, sort of practice. When it says practice and theory of Tibetan Buddhism. And the last part is the theory, the tenets. So this is a different text than the one we're using, but is also very brief, maybe about the same length as our text, written by Konchog Jigme Wangpo, I think, who was the Tibetan Lama many hundreds of years ago, who composed this text. So this is nice because it has a little bit of commentary between in the various sections, and it's a nice way of getting some of the things are almost exactly the same definitions and divisions. Sometimes they may be phrased in a different way. So that's a nice thing to have if you can afford it. I don't know what it costs nowadays on Amazon or wherever you go. It used to be called Practice and Theory of Tibetan Buddhism. I've mentioned in other courses, sort of like some of the book houses, they changed the name and they changed the cover picture. And those like Bob, whose library you can see behind him, is very acquisitive for books, may end up buying the new one because it's got a different name, but it says originally published as Practice and Theory of Tibetan Buddhism. So I recommend that very highly.
See, Venerable George, just because you were mentioning it, I think it runs it's pretty inexpensive. It's something like $20 or $25 in Amazon.
Right. And I have found sometimes that if you look, if the books are used on Amazon, there's different people who you can choose one where it says very good quality. Usually it's a little bit cheaper than buying the new one, and they're usually quite fine. Another reference I would recommend is this big tome called, if you already have it, Meditation on Emptiness, that was written by Jeffrey Hopkins. It's essentially a rearrangement of his PhD thesis. Jeffrey Hopkins is one of the preeminent Buddhist translators who's translated for the Dalai Lama for many, many years and considered to be one of the great experts about Tibetan Buddhism. And in that text, if you happen to have it, or if you might want to get it from the library and photocopy the section on tenets, very, very good. That section, if you have that book on Buddhist tenets, starts on page 335 and goes on to, maybe 400 or something like that. So this is a very, very good explanation. If you have that book already, or if you can get it from the library and maybe photocopy it or something like that, usually that's considered, for academic purposes, that's considered legitimate. And then, okay, so those are levels of sophistication. This first text that we're going to be using was written by the textbook author of Sarajay Monastery, who lived several hundred years ago, Jason Chuki Gelson. Chu means Dharma, Gelson means victory banner. So he was called the victory banner of the Dharma. And Jetsun means venerable, or, is an accolade of respect. Like we say Jetsun Milarepa, or Jetsuma Droma, Jetsuma Tara. So he was 1469 to 1546, as you can see on the title page there. The other text in Cutting Through Appearances is Konchuk Jigme Wangpo, I believe. And then Jeffrey Hopkins, his text is a compendium of various texts. Finally, for those of you who are really interested, is that reversed? Can you read that? You can, okay, because I don't see it. I see it backwards on my screen there. This is called Maps of the Profound, again by Jeffrey Hopkins. And this is all about the tenets in much more detail. The great treatise by Jamyang Shepa, who was one of the great Tibetan authors, a great practitioner and scholar. And this has more detail than the other texts. So there are varying degrees of detail. So the big one on the bottom is the most detailed. And then Jeffrey Hopkins is a little more detailed in some places than Cutting Through Appearances. And our basic text that we all have access to, that we're going to be receiving commentary on, is the shortest of them. Okay, so that's just resources. It might be possible to find on the web a PDF of Jeffrey Hopkins' book, or at least those sections on tenets. You might not have to end up paying for it. Okay, so let's dive in. Presentation of tenets has some copyright stuff. Then it has contents, which is not part of the text. This is just this particular translator's way. I have Glenn Svenson's translation here. So on page, what would it be? Page, I don't have the number. Oh, page 1, presentation of tenets. So the title page and the contents don't have numbers. Presentation of tenets. So it begins, as many Tibetan texts, most Tibetan texts do, with an homage. I pay homage to the eminent holy beings who are in essence inseparable from the Guru, the protector Manjushri. So this is Jason Chukyi Gelson's homage. Generally, you have you received, how many of you guys have received teachings, formal teachings on Buddhist philosophical texts before? Okay, good number. I can't see those who don't have their cameras on. I can't see. So generally, at the beginning of a text, it's if it is a translation of a text from Sanskrit, there was a tradition of saying the title, of writing the title in Sanskrit, in Tibetan letters, they kind of phonetics, and then then translating that into Tibetan. This was to show the kindness of the translators of the past, but this is not a translation of a particular text, so it doesn't have a homage. It doesn't have that title that way in Indian and Tibetan, but it does have a homage, which is tradition in the translation or the writing of texts, in order for there to be auspiciousness of completing the text, creating virtue at the very beginning. Also, it shows one's familiarity with the tradition of Buddhism, where one would, all of the great lamas in the past would always pay homage to various aspects of the Buddha or the Bodhisattvas or these higher realizations in order to accumulate merit. And so it became a custom to show that you're doing it in the same way, to pay homage. So when it says, I pay homage to the eminent body, the eminent holy beings, the venerable holy beings who are in essence, who are in nature, inseparable from Guru, Protector, Manjushri. So you can take that in various ways to mean just Manjushri, considering Manjushri as your Guru and guide. Here the word protector doesn't necessarily mean like protector of the Dharma, like we talk about, have you heard Dharmapalas? Like Mahakala or various kinds of wrathful deities that are protectors of the Dharma. It doesn't mean protector in that sense. It's the Indian word nata, which means, it kind of means someone who protects you, but who guides you. So from the guiding guru Manjushri, you can take it that way. You can also take it as meaning, because Jason Trungpa Gelson was a Gelugpa scholar, one of the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and all of the Gelugpas consider Je Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa, to be the manifestation of Manjushri and their guru, so that you can take it also in sort of like prostration, homage to Lama Tsongkhapa. So at any rate, I pay homage to the eminent holy beings who are in essence inseparable from Guru, Protector, or the guiding Guru Manjushri. Here, in explaining the presentation of tenets, I'm reading from that text. Here in explaining the presentation of tenets, there are 3 outlines: definitions, divisions, and the meaning of each division. This is very Tibetan Gelugpa style of dividing the text up in outlines and everything. I find it very useful. So first of all, definition. We're talking about the presentation of tenets, right? So basically, this is a presentation of Buddhist tenets. It will mention some of the Indian philosophical schools, by the way, that existed at the time of the Buddha. And some of these other texts do cover presentation of non-Buddhist tenets. All the other 3 texts that I showed you. Here we're mainly dealing just with the Buddhist tenets. The other ones deal both with the non-Buddhist and the Buddhist. When we say non-Buddhist, it doesn't mean Christian or Muslim or what else, Baha'i or other things that are present now. Usually it means the philosophical schools of tenets that existed at the time of the Buddha. Okay, so here, the definition of a person who propounds Buddhist tenets. So there's generally Buddhists don't, in Tibetan, people who are Buddhists don't refer to themselves as, literally as Buddhists. In Tibetan, it would be like Sanghepa, I think. Sanghe means Buddha. Sanghepa means a person who is maybe a follower of Buddha. But they refer to themselves as inner beings, Nangpa. The word Nang in Tibetan, one particular spelling of that means inside or inner. So you can think of it in various ways. One way that people often think of it is that when you talk about the definition of an inner being is the insiders, like what do the Italians say? Cosa Nostra. You know what Cosa Nostra is? Who's Italian here? Is anyone Italian? Yeah, Karen Mastriani. So, so Cosa Nostra means our thing, right? Cosa means thing. Nostra means our. That belongs to us. So the Cosa Nostra is sort of like inner, and the outsiders, the other people that are not Nostra, are not our, are the outsiders. Or we talk about in various modern religions, Christians and non-Christians, Muslims and non-Muslims. So Nangpa can have that connotation. That's how many people think of it. But my teacher Lama Yeshe always used to emphasize that the real meaning of Nangpa, or inner being, is an individual who depends for their guidance on inner mind and wisdom and so forth, and compassion, rather than the outer circumstances, trying to manipulate the outer world, make more money, beat up people, become more famous, whatever one does to manipulate the outer world. So Chipa, which is the opposite of Nangpa, means outer beings, are people that are basically like most Americans, even so-called, religious people of the book, the Abrahamic religions and so forth. Mainly, although real practitioners of those also depend on their own mind and satisfaction, inner satisfaction. They don't seek the main goal as manipulating the outer world, like the 8 worldly dharmas. So here let's get the right page here. Yeah. So what do we say here? The definition of a person who propounds Buddhist tenets. So in the Tibetan text, it actually says Nangpa Sangheba. So inner Buddhist tenets is, the definition is a person who is a proponent of tenets, or a person propounding tenets, who accepts the 3 jewels to be the final objects of refuge. The Tibetan word that's translated here as final is yangdaktu, which actually means maybe the correct, proper refuge. That's someone who accepts the 3 jewels as the actual refuge, and who does not assert any objects of refuge other than them to be authentic or real or final. So what does that mean? Someone who is a Buddhist is someone who takes refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, right? The 3 jewels. You all know that term, right? The 3 jewels. I joked sometime in other courses, there is one of our dear friends, Dr. Nick Ribush, who's run the Lama Yeshe archive, Wisdom Archive, for many years. He wrote a book review about a book printed by the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives many years ago that had a lot of typographical errors. And in one, he pointed out, it talked about the 3 Jews of refuge. Dr. Nick, of course, is Jewish. Nick Ribush is Jewish. He said, the 3 Jews of refuge? So it goes, Alex Berzin, John Landau, and who? John Landau and Alex Berzin are also Jewish. So is here is not the three Jews of refuge, it's three jewels of refuge. In Sanskrit, we say Triratna, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So someone who accepts them or asserts them as the actual perfect refuge. For a Buddhist, there is no actual refuge other than the three jewels. And so when we say refuge, you know what refuge means. You know, like if it's raining, you may seek refuge under the what's it called, bus stop kiosk, you know, where it protects you from the rain, or you go under the trees to seek refuge, or you go into a house. If you are seeking refuge from suffering in your neighborhood, if you're in Chicago, where I was born, you might seek the guidance or protection or refuge of the alderman in your area. You know, is that a term that's used in modern other cities, alderman? Sort of like some political guy who can get your streets fixed. That's been big, you know, they have the guys out in front for months and months, but if you bring some offerings to the alderman, he can have it fixed right away. You can take refuge for various kinds of worldly things to other, you know, to beings other than the three jewels of refuge. But as a final refuge, to get to the goal of escaping from cyclic existence or of achieving enlightenment, there is no other authentic, if you want to, when it says yang daktu here, authentic or final object of refuge other than the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the definition of a person who propounds Buddhist tenets here is a person propounding tenets. And again, tenets, I'll explain again in a second what tenets mean. Tenets who accepts the three jewels to be the final objects of refuge, the actual objects of refuge, authentic objects of refuge, and who does not assert any objects of refuge other than them to be authentic. Okay, but that doesn't preclude you making offerings in the Tibetan sense to local spirits that may help with the elimination of contagious diseases or, you know, famine and different things like that. You can make offerings and even take, you know, seek a certain kind of refuge from worldly beings and worldly spirits and worldly gods, but not, you would not seek refuge to them to get out of cyclic existence or to achieve enlightenment, because they're all still immersed in that. Okay. Just as an aside, when we talk about tenets, the Tibetan word is drupta. Drup means established. Ta means end or conclusion. So we could translate it as established conclusion. So it's something which you have through logic, reasoning, and so forth, and through reading the scriptures and having faith in them, you've developed an understanding of what is established, what exists and what doesn't exist for your philosophical view. And that is a conclusion that you've come to. The Sanskrit word is siddhanta, which means essentially the same thing. So here, just the definition of tenets. I want to read from Yeshe, Zopa, and Jeffrey Hopkins' book here. Okay, I should have put the yellow marker on it. Okay. So they, in this book, there's a different definition of proponent of Buddhist tenets is a person who asserts the four seals, which are views testifying that a doctrine is Buddha's, who accepts the four seals or asserts the four seals. Do you know what the four seals are? So those that I can see, who knows? I think David and Karen know. I can see they're trying to count them. Bob knows. Justin, do you know what the four seals are? Okay. Alejandra, do you know what the four seals are? No? Victor? No? Oh, okay. David, I can't see if that's actually you or that's just a photo. Yeah, you're moving. Do you know what the four seals are, David? You do. Okay. Losang? You know? Doris? Okay, so some are, so the force, so this is a different definition of a proponent of Buddhist tenets, someone who is setting up one of these philosophical schools like Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, or Madhyamaka. So one definition said someone who asserts the three jewels of refuge to be the only actual refuge and doesn't accept other actual final refuges other than them. And this one is said is a person who accepts or asserts the four seals, which are the views testifying that a doctrine is Buddha's. So if you happen to have this book, or if you were going to get it later, it's that definition is on the bottom, near the bottom of the page of 176. You make a note of that if you want. So what are the four seals? It's not like, Minnie Mouse with different, mice with different names, or four seals, not those kind of seals. Seal in the sense of mudra in Tibetan. Mudra, you may know the word mudra from Tantra, we're talking about various hand gestures or so forth. But mudra in Sanskrit, one of the main meanings is seal. Like if you get your transcript from college, you're applying for a job and they want to have a copy of your transcript, unless it has a seal on it, you could have done a Photoshop, right? You could have typed it up, or not Photoshop, you could have done it on Microsoft Word and printed it out. And so a seal is something that testifies authenticity. So the four seals that testify or indicate that something is a doctrine of Buddhism is, and there's some slight changes here, but all compounded phenomena are impermanent. That's the first one. You know what compounded phenomena means? Means phenomena that come about through effort, that are brought about, compounded through various causes and conditions. Everything that has come about because of causes and conditions is necessarily impermanent. That means they change moment by moment, or they're momentary phenomena. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. Some Buddhist schools, some of the Sarvastivadin schools, which we'll talk about later, propounded that all phenomena are impermanent. Some schools didn't accept that there were any impermanent phenomena, but those are from the Buddhist pantheon, that the very, very small sliver that say all phenomena are impermanent. Most Buddhist schools, say more than 99%, I don't know what to say that there are two kinds of phenomena: those that are change moment by moment, impermanent, and those which don't change moment by moment, they're permanent. Okay, so all compounded phenomena are impermanent. Second seal, all contaminated things are miserable, suffering, dugnal. All contaminated things. So what does that mean? Everything that is contaminated by delusion or is a result of your creating diluted karma in the past, any kind of experience. You might have pleasure or pain, or you can even talk about bodies, the bodies of the Buddha. Is the Buddha, do you think, contaminated or uncontaminated? Do you have, maybe you don't know quite what that means. Contaminated means it has within its continuum afflictions like anger, attachment, and so forth, or it has come about because of, like say, the body itself. My body is contaminated because it has arisen because of karma that was created in the past that was contaminated karma, contaminated by ignorance and self-grasping and anger, attachment, and so forth. So for some schools, the Buddha's body is still contaminated. You know, Shakyamuni Buddha's body was contaminated, they say, because when he began his last life, they understand, he was born as a prince, and that life was thrown, so to speak, propelled by karma from a previous life where he still had afflictions, contaminations in his mind. But when he sat under the Bodhi tree and went through the various paths and achieved enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Bodhi means enlightenment, right? That body remained the same, that body itself was the result of the past karma. So they said, some Buddhists say that the Buddha's body is contaminated. Others, especially the Mahayana, say that the Buddha's body is not contaminated. We'll see. We'll talk about that later. So two seals. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. All products, you could say, are impermanent. All contaminated phenomena are miserable and suffering. All phenomena now are selfless. Selfless has a particular meaning that we'll be talking about. And fourth seal is nirvana is peace. Nirvana is peace. Those are called the four seals, and that would be worth, who knows? There might be a question on the examination. You know, those are the kind of things you might say, what are the four seals? So we had two different definitions of proponent of Buddhist tenets. Someone who's setting forth Buddhist tenets is a person who propounds Buddhist tenets, a person propounding tenets who accepts the three jewels to be the final or authentic object of refuge and does not assert or accept any objects of refuge that are authentic other than them. You know, it still means you can accept your councilmen, your, worldly gods, or, friends and so forth as a certain source of refuge, especially younger kids. You go to your dad or mom or your uncle or your grandma if you have a problem, right? They're your refuge. You can do that, still be a Buddhist. Whereas the other definition is someone who accepts or propounds the four seals, which are views testifying to that a doctrine is Buddhist. Those
Venerable George,
yes.
Venerable George, do you accept questions?
Yes. If you have questions, put yourself on video and raise your hand, or blurt it out if you don't want to put on your video for some reason, if you're in your pajamas or in the bathroom or something like that.
Okay.
So you have a question, Bob?
Yeah, I do have a question, and that's sort of a distinction, because I mean, I notice here in the definitions they talk about a person who propounds. So
Right.
you can ask whether the emphasis is on the person or whether the emphasis on the tenets, because when you talk about the four seals, it seems like the emphasis is more on what it is you believe. Whereas, so you can maybe separate, are the tenets Buddhist or is the person Buddhist? And I don't know if the second definition is more focused on the tenets or is also more focused on the person. But I thought it was different because, because there are Buddhist and non-Buddhist tenets. So you could make a distinction about whether the tenets you hold are in congruence with these four seals, or whether, so maybe a person goes for refuge to the three jewels, but maybe he holds non-Buddhist tenets that aren't consonant with these four jewels. I just wonder if you can make that distinction.
Right. So when you investigate the origin of these two things, it comes down to the definition of a Buddhist. So for some, a Buddhist is someone who takes refuge to the three jewels from the depth of their heart. That's one of the, say, practice-oriented definitions of a Buddhist. I like to joke when I teach in Singapore that, a lot of people have on their passport in Singapore, religion Buddhist, or they have an identity card that says they're Buddhist. I said, that doesn't mean you're a Buddhist. If you don't take refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, really from the depth of your heart, that's what you're taking ultimate refuge in, you're not really a Buddhist, whether you have it on your certificate or whatever. Another philosophical definition of a Buddhist is the one from Jigme Wangpo's book here, someone who accepts the four seals testifying that a doctrine is Buddhist. So they accept that all compounded phenomena are impermanent, all contaminated phenomena are suffering, all phenomena are selfless, and that nirvana is peace. So if you look at present religions, certainly they wouldn't, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Baha'i, Hinduism, and so forth, they generally don't use the word nirvana. Some Hindu schools assert nirvana, a nirvana, but generally they wouldn't say nirvana is peace. So someone who accepts these four schools is a sort of, these four seals is kind of like a philosophical definition of a Buddhist. So a propounder of Buddhist tenets means a person, or let's say the school, if you're talking about the school that's propounding the tenets, the person who accepts the three jewels as the actual, let me say the only actual refuge. That would be someone who's propounding Buddhist tenets from the practical point of view, someone defining a Buddhist who is someone who takes refuge takes refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. From the philosophical point of view, is someone who propounds the four seals, who accepts those. The four seals kind of like testify, if you check a text and if there's anything within that text or that proposition or school that contradicts the four schools, you don't get the seal of being Buddhist doctrine, okay? Okay, so anyway, Bob may discuss that a bit more afterwards. By the way, after the class, Bob will stay on. So those of you who want to have a little bit discussion for about a half an hour, and he will be able to answer other questions that you might be too embarrassed to ask in the big group or whatever, for whatever reason, or you want to have more, so what did he say? I didn't understand his Chicago accent, or, some question like that. So stay tuned. You don't have to leave. I'll disappear and then Bob will be there. So that's the definition of a person who propounds Buddhist tenets. So now divisions. What are the divisions of Buddhist tenets? So there are 4. It says the proponents of the great exposition, and it says Sanskrit Vaibhashika. So Vaibhashikas are so called. I guess we'll have that later. Anyway, we're just going to say Vaibhashikas. The Sautrantikas, which here it says proponents of sutra. The word proponent doesn't come in the actual Tibetan there. That's something that the translator has added, thinking that it made it more consistent. The mind-only school, Chittamatra, and those who propound, here it says proponents of the middle way, the Madhyamaka. Actually, this is not, the Tibetan doesn't say that at all. It says the proponents, those who propound entitylessness, the lack of entity. And that's another synonym for Madhyamaka, although the text never uses the word Madhyamaka, which in Tibetan would be Uma, middle way. The first 2, which are the Hinayana tenets, the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas, are schools that propound objects. That is to say, objects in the sense that they appear to us as being truly existent, and they accept them to be truly existent, truly established or truly existent external objects. Okay. So if I ask you, what are the divisions of Buddhist tenets? You could say Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and you could say Madhyamaka, or you could say proponents of entitylessness. That would be more precise. I was supposed to give a break. Do anyone need to go off to the toilet or to have a cup of tea? We've only got a half an hour left. Anyone vote for a break? Okay, we'll just continue. Sorry about that. So we've got the definition of the proponent, someone who propounds Buddhist tenets. They essentially have to be propounding tenets that accord with the Buddhist teachings. Okay, and there are 4 divisions: the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, Madhyamaka. Here the Glenn Svensson's translation says Madhyamika. Actually, there's a difference between Madhyamaka and Madhyamika. Jeffrey Hopkins points out that generally in Sanskrit, Madhyamaka is the name of the middle way school, the highest philosophical school, right? Someone who is a practitioner of the Madhyamaka is called a Madhyamika. Aka and Ika. So it should be the proponents of the middle way. They would be, well, it depends on what you're taking. That the propounders of the middle way would be people, so they'd be Madhyamikas, but the middle way itself is the Madhyamaka. Okay, so now the explanation, the meaning of each division. So the explanation of the Great Exposition School, the Vaibhashika, the meaning, the explanation of the Sutra School, the Sautrantika, the Mind-Only School, the Chittamatra, and the Middle Way School. Right. So first comes the Great Exposition School, the Vaibhashika. This has 7 outlines. So this is what we're going to be talking about for a couple of sessions. There are the definitions of the Vaibhashika, the divisions, the etymology, the way that they assert objects, the way that they assert subjects or object possessors, and the way that they assert the selfless. Here it says selflessness, but the Tibetan just says selfless, and the presentation of the grounds and paths. So when it says subjects and objects, generally from the point of view of the mind, each mind is a subject, and it takes its objects as something other than itself. If you talk about clairvoyance, like this mind knows some other's mind, that other mind would be the object in that case. But usually subjects have objects, right? How are we doing? We're doing okay? Okay. So definition. The definition of a proponent of the Great Exposition, actually, we should just say the definition of a Vaibhashika. Actually, a Vaibhashika doesn't mean a proponent of the Great Exposition. It means a proponent of particulars. A person propounding lesser vehicle, Hinayana tenets, who does not assert self-knowers or self-cognizers, but does assert truly established external objects. So the definition of a Vaibhashika is someone who accepts, propounds Hinayana tenets, does not accept self-cognizing awareness, but does accept truly existent external objects. What does that all mean? How to unpack that? So there is a particular kind of consciousness that is accepted by the middle 2 schools, the Sautrantika and the Chittamatra in general, but is not accepted by the Vaibhashika and the Prasangika Madhyamikas. That is called self-knowing or autocognition, or self-cognizing awareness. All translation of the same word in Tibetan, rang rik. Rang means self, rik means awareness or knowing or cognizing. So what it means is, generally, a consciousness, let's say your mental consciousness, or say your eye consciousness, has an object which is external to itself. It perceives shapes and colors, right? Some Buddhist schools accept that there is a facet of that consciousness, say the eye consciousness, as an example, that also not only is pointed outward, directed outward toward color and shape and color, but is directed inward and knows the nature of that consciousness, that consciousness is presently active, so called self-cognizing, self-awareness, various ways, Rangrik. Interestingly, the lowest school, the Vaibhashika, and the highest of the Madhyamaka schools, the Prasangika, both refute. So the lowest and the highest are accord in this, that they both do not accept that that exists, that there is a consciousness that can know itself. The Sautrantikas, most of the Sautrantikas, the Chittamatra, and some of the Madhyamakas, the Svatantrika Madhyamaka that are following reasoning, I think, or following scripture, they accept the existence of Rangrik. So what is that Rangrik? You've all studied Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Vatara somewhat, right? In that somewhat, okay, maybe not all. In that he talks about, he gives an explanation refuting self-awareness or self-cognizing awareness, Rangrik. He said, just as a sword, the blade of a sword cannot cut itself, consciousness cannot know itself. Do you agree? Can a sword cut itself? Generally, if you think of a sword, you use it to, you chop off the opponent's head or you slice into their arm or whatever. It has an outer object. Can a sword cut itself? Well, you can cut another sword, like in some movies, two guys are fighting with swords and one cuts the blade of the other sword. That's not self-awareness. That's cutting another sword, right? But can one sword cut itself? What do you think? You might argue that you can bend the blade and one part of the blade then can cut another part of the blade, right? So that's not an example of self-knowing awareness either, self-cognizer. Because you can, as in our initial meditation, one part of the mind can kind of observe another part of the mind. That doesn't constitute self-knowing or self-awareness, self-cognizing. Self-cognizing is a hypothetical state in which a consciousness, besides its main occupation of knowing other objects, it also is aware of its own existence as being clear and knowing. So the lowest and the highest of the philosophical schools don't accept that such a thing exists, self-knowers. So here, the definition of a proponent of the Great Exposition or proponent of particulars is a person propounding lesser vehicle tenets, Hinayana tenets, who does not accept self-knowers. Okay, so that limits it, of the four philosophical schools, that limits it to Vaibhashika and Prasangika, but does not assert truly established external objects. Always, we might say, and does not assert truly established external objects. So what does that mean? Why does that define a Vaibhashika? Because the external objects, like say in the Chittamatra school, does not accept the existence of external objects that are different entity than the mind. They say all the phenomena that we think of as external are of the nature of the mind. They still accept those objects, but they don't accept them as being truly established or truly existing for the Chittamatra school, the mind-only school. So this is kind of differentiating them from the Chittamatra. But the first part of the definition would also differentiate them from the Chittamatra, because it says a person propounding Hinayana tenets. So the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka, Prasangika especially, they're propounding Mahayana tenets. So this is differentiating them from the other Hinayana school, the Sautrantaka, who does not assert truly established external objects. That second part of the definition is explicitly excluding the Sautrantaka. So you're left with just the Vaibhashika. Okay, we'll review this a little next time. You may have questions, and we'll go over it again next time. But just let's go on to the second thing: divisions. There are three divisions of Vaibhashika. The Vaibhashikas, the Kashmiri Vaibhashikas, those that are from Kashmir. Do you know where Kashmir is? Justin, you don't know? No. Anyone been to Kashmir? I bet David Lee has. It almost looks like his background is Kashmir there. Anyway, Kashmir is a region in northwest part of India. It's part of India. So say the Indian subcontinent, the northwest corner is called Kashmir. One of the, there's Kashmir, Ladakh, and what's the other place? Kashmir, Ladakh. I can't remember. There's a third part up there. So the Kashmiris, Kashmir was one area where the Vaibhashika thrived, and they had their own particular take on some of the Vaibhashika tenets. The Vaibhashikas from here says the western region. So the Aparantakas. Aparanta refers to Gujarat, let's say Gujarat, Bactria. Do you know what Bactria was in ancient times? Part of the west side of India, extending into Pakistan, where Bamiyan, remember Bamiyan, the great statues, even as far as Afghanistan, all of that was called Bactria, and it was a region where the Alexander the Great and the Greeks had colonies and so forth. So that region, so the Kashmiri Vaibhashikas had their own tenets. The Aparantakas, kind of like the western part of the country. And then the Vaibhashikas that were from Magadha. Magadha is the region, let's say from Varanasi to Bodh Gaya, in the eastern side of India. That was called Magadha, where most of the Buddha's teachings took place. So those are the three divisions. Other texts, I don't think any of these other texts divide up the Vaibhashikas into that. Generally, we say that there are 18 Vaibhashika schools, one of which is come down to the present as the Theravada. You've heard of Theravada, right? So Theravada is Pali, name for that school. In Sanskrit, it's actually Staiviravada. Staivira means elder. In Pali, it's called Tara. Say, for instance, a monk who has been ordained, fully ordained bhikshu, fully ordained monk, for 10 years or more is called a Tara. And so an elder. In fact, they even, if you've been ordained for 20 years, you're called a Mahatera. So you may see that in the titles of some Pali monks, monks in the Theravada tradition. So usually the Vaibhashika school was different than the Sautrantika, the Hinayana tenets. The Sautrantika had a couple of divisions, but the Vaibhashika, there were 18 different schools, let's say from the time of the Buddha, that kind of split off because they said, oh no, we're different, you're wrong. You didn't understand what the Buddha meant by this. And they had slightly different ideas. They had slightly different rules of discipline, the Vinaya and so forth. So one of those schools was called the Staiviravada, the Theravada in Pali, which exists still today. So we would say that the present Theravada actually is kind of follows it fits as a Vaibhashika school. That's where they would exist. So when we're studying these tenets, when we're studying the Vaibhashika, we're kind of getting an idea about the Theravada. But the present Theravada maybe has evolved from that original Staiviravada, and they accept things differently now. So it's kind of hard to say what the present Theravada. Some Theravada monks take tantric ordination, take bodhisattva vows. Almost sounds like they accept the Vaibhashika or the Theravada tenets, but they're Mahayanists in practice. You can make a distinction. Someone who is we may accept Mahayana tenets, maybe some of us here, we're Gelugpa or we're Mahayana, but our view may be one which is, our practice may be one that is Hinayana, that is, we're working for our own liberation. Maybe not even that. Maybe we're not even Hinayana by practice. We may not have actual renunciation of cyclic existence. We still want to get, lots of money and pleasure and so forth, thinking of this life as predominant. Yet there are some people who hold Hinayana tenets, philosophical view, whose heart is, compassionate and working for others, and may even be working to achieve enlightenment. So when it says here divisions, there are 3 divisions. That's a little bit of a simplification. It's hard to see. I haven't seen any text that explains which of the 18 schools are Kashmiri. Well, usually there's one, the Kashmiri Vaibhashikas. I don't know which of them are from the Western region or which of those 18 are Magadha. I haven't seen any text that divides them, but they're generally, you can answer 2 ways. There are 3 divisions of Vaibhashikas, Kashmiris, Aparantakas, and Magadhas, or you can say there are 18 divisions. And finally, etymology. Why are they called Vaibhashika, proponents of particulars? They are called such, they're called that because they propound tenets through following a text called the Mahavibhasha, the Great Exposition of Particulars. that was written by an Indian scholar called Vasumitra. The Mahavibhasha. The Vaibhashikas, it's V-A-I, right? Vaibhashika. So Vibhasa, Mahavibhasa, the Sanskrit word Vibhasa just refers to the text. It's a text of that's dividing all phenomena into various kinds of particular instances, different minds, what we often think of in the Abhidharma as lists and so forth. When you try to make that into a person who's following the Vibhasa or the Mahavibhasa, you add ka at the end that makes it into a person, and it strengthens the initial vowel from V to Vi. Anyway, those of you, there may be some people who are listening or will listen on YouTube who know a little bit about that. They're called Vaibhashikas because either they follow the Mahavibhasha that was composed by Vasumitra, or alternately, they are called Vaibhashikas, proponents of particulars, because they propound the 3 times to be particular substances, particular instances or examples of substances. So past, let's say right now, from our point of view, my present iPhone, this is the present iPhone. There was an iPhone that existed yesterday or last week or last year, this one, this a couple of years old. Does that does that past iPhone exist now as a substance? Well, you might say the past iPhone exists as a memory, but it doesn't exist as a substance. Like this, you could say this exists as a substance right now, some kind of substantial, tangible existence. The Vaibhashikas accept that the past and the future, and not only the present iPhone, but the past and the future iPhone exist now as substances. What do you think? Yeah, right, okay. Doris, yeah. So if you have one of the other texts, this or Jeffrey Hopkins' 2 texts, they give explanations about this. One of the very problematic philosophical problems of these various schools is they all disagree they all have different presentations of the 3 times, the past, the present, and the future. So we'll talk about a little bit about that next time. Let me ask, you will have a chance to ask Bob questions if you have questions after this. Remember, remain online. But do you have any questions you wanted to address right now? Anyone? Victor looks like he's demuting. No? Okay. No? I'm going to question myself. Okay. So let's end with a very brief dedication. We tried to set a motivation at the beginning, recognizing the perfect human rebirth, the opportunity we have right now to recognize the clear light nature of the mind. So we tried to develop a motivation that we were listening to the discourse for the purpose of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. What was that? Someone had something. So just think, due to these merits that I've created this morning, in your case, here's this afternoon here, may they not ripen simply in my pleasure samsaric pleasure, contaminated pleasure in future lifetimes, or being powerful or influential or famous or whatever. But whatever way these merits ripen, may they become the cause and condition of my continued spiritual development up to and including enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So that means kind of like a mental state that making a strong wish or desire, aspiration, that these merits be directed in a certain way. Dedication is a kind of prayer, but it is not just prayer in general. It's a prayer that's thinking, may these merits ripen in the ways that I am wishing them to be. Like if you get your income tax refund and you dedicate it to your nephew or your son, daughter's college education. You set it aside, you make a strong determination it's going to be used for that. So think, may these merits ripen in such a way that they enhance my spiritual practice from life to life, up to and including the development of bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness, certainly renunciation of cyclic existence, up into including enlightenment. May these merits exist to bring about those goals. So as the dedication prayers, due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead each and every living being without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. I want to say mo and mo. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in the world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then the long life prayer of Zopa Yeshe, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. The Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. And Lama Oso, Venerable One, you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay, thank you. We're just about finished on time. There's a minute left. So I will leave you in the kind hands of Bob, and hope to see you again next Friday, same station, what to say, same place, same station, same time. And if you have any questions, you can perhaps, if Bob is not able to satisfy you, you can send questions to him and he can send them to me, and then we can address them before the next class. Okay? Take care.